Thanks to everyone for joining. You're here today for an inside look at raptor migration. We've got folks here from Florida, South Carolina, Colorado. I think we're hitting every state and then some. So I'm going to get us started. My name is Sharon, and I'm the communications manager for Audubon Connecticut and Audubon New York, two state programs of the National Audubon Society. We're joined today by a couple of experts on raptor migration from a couple different organizations, and excited to be with you. So today's webinar will be recorded. It will be available on Facebook immediately as soon as we're done, and it will go up on YouTube as soon as tomorrow. So it will be recorded. On today's webinar, you are going to learn how to identify and tell the difference between various raptors in flight. Our experts from Bedford Audubon Society, Audubon Connecticut, and the Braddock Bay Raptor Research Center are going to tell you some of the best viewing spots to experience the magic of migration, how to participate in a hawkwatch this fall, explain what a hawkwatch is, and how it helps scientists gather data. And we will be joined by a special guest, a feathered friend, towards the end of our program. So you'll have to stick with us and learn all about raptors before you can meet our feathered friend. Again, the webinar will be recorded and available to view. Questions can be put into the chat box at any time, but we're going to hold them for the end when we'll have an open Q&A. You can ask all your questions then. With that, I will pass the mic over to Ryan McLean, who is our first presenter out at the Audubon Greenwich Center in Connecticut. And it looks like we caught Ryan in the middle of hawk watching. Hey Ryan, how's it going?
Hey Sharon, thank you so much everyone for being with us on this wonderful afternoon. My name is Ryan McLean, and I'm the bird education specialist of the Greenwich Audubon Center located here in Greenwich, Connecticut. And currently, thankfully the rain has stopped this afternoon and it's now a beautiful afternoon outside. I'm standing on this very special area right next to the parking lot of our 300-acre preserve here in Greenwich, Connecticut. This lawn holds a very special significance for our site because for nearly 40 years, since the 1970s, this is where we have conducted our Quaker Ridge Hawkwatch, where individuals like myself and both volunteer and paid observers have spent hours sitting on this lawn, looking at this beautiful expansive view in front of me, utilizing our binoculars, telescopes, scanning the skies up and down. And each day from the end of August to the end of November, we actively observe, identify, and tally migrating hawks, eagles, falcons, and vultures, along with some other species of birds and even insects that pass over this area in migration every year. All of this information is crucial community science research that helps ornithologists to understand the health of our raptor populations, because raptors are at the very top of the food chain. And if we see problems in their populations, chances are there are problems affecting all of the levels of the food chains below them. So over many decades, the information gathered from hawkwatches has provided some of the most important confirmation information to our naturalist community in order to help our environment. All of the information we gather here is sent to the Hawk Migration Association of North America, which gathers all of the data that we and hawkwatches across North America and Central America. And for years, we have compiled that information on tally sheets, such as this, where not only do we note how many of each species we see each day, we also note some factors such as the weather conditions, what direction the wind is, the temperature, wind speed, humidity. All of these factors go into the data and information that they collect to be able to understand changes and variations of raptor populations over time. We also utilize some devices such as little metal sports clickers, because on some days, and I'll explain some of the best conditions for seeing raptors very shortly, Some days you're going to want to have one of these so we can count the birds easily if they're traveling in large groups together, because some species, one in particular, will do that, and it brings so much excitement into the hawkwatch season every fall. So this clicker here is utilized to count the birds easier so we can write down larger numbers afterwards. And one of the very first questions, or very shocking realizations that people express to us when they walk up here and they see what we're doing, a lot of times we get the expression, gee, I didn't even know that birds of prey migrate. A lot of people know of the migration of songbirds, a lot of which are traveling under the cover of darkness and stars. They are largely doing that to stay safe from their larger winged predators during the day. But to understand why raptors migrate, all you have to do is take a look at the hawk menu, just like at a restaurant right here. But this graphic right here shows you the different diets and different food preferences for different species of birds of prey. Because all of these birds are raptors, catching their prey with their sharp talons on the end of their feet. But different species of hawks are designed to catch different types of food. And that will also help us in identifying them as well, which will be explained a bit later. But some familiar species like our red-tailed hawk, you'll notice that their diet largely consists of rodents. And because rodents are prevalent in our area across all 12 months of the year, a lot of red-tailed hawks don't have to migrate. They can find food year-round. But some other species, such as the broad-winged hawk, its smaller cousin, you see up here, their diet consists of insects and even reptiles and amphibians. So a species like that is going to have to go somewhere where they are going to find the food that they need to be able to survive in those months where they're not going to find those food resources here. And species such as the sharp-shinned hawk, you can see that their diet almost entirely consists of small birds. So that is why they are following the other small birds that are migrating each year. So knowing that these birds migrate, it then has to be a deciding factor where these birds are gathering. And while any site, any given location in the Northeast can be an area that you could potentially see hawks migrating over your head, there are certain factors that make our site a special one in particular. And on the first slide I'm going to show you, some of you may be wondering where and how you can hawkwatch, the best types of locations to do it, and also the best kind of weather conditions that you can look for. So on this first slide, so what are the hawk watching wheres and whens? Now, our site in particular, it wasn't exactly known at first that this was an area that many birds of prey could be seen in migration. People had already begun hawk watching in areas in the early 1900s, such as Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania, Montclair Hawkwatch in New Jersey, but people then realized these birds have to be coming down from somewhere to get to these locations. Why not find a place to hawkwatch in Connecticut? So in the 1970s, people tried out different locations in lower Western Fairfield County, and they determined that this location actually was a very suitable site to see large numbers of birds of prey, because on some days that they came out, they happened to see many birds of prey migrating. And they determined that's because of several different factors. I mean, if you look in front of me, it looks like we're on a very lowly elevated lawn. We have a lot of sky in front of us, but here we are actually at about 510 feet elevation above sea level. And beyond the tree line, there lies a ridge line that you could see out to our east. Now, ridge lines are a very important and crucial factor for raptors in migration, because a lot of species of hawks, if you're a species that needs to travel all the way from here to, say, the South American rainforest, you don't want to flap that whole distance. You got to utilize alternate sources of energy. When you find mountain ridges, that provides not only a southern-facing highway of ridges, or as we like to call them, flyways, but when wind hits a mountain ridge, it will shoot upward, creating what we call an updraft. And that gives them a magic carpet ride of sorts to come down to further directions southward so that they don't have to utilize all of their body energy while they are flying. Also, when sun heats the ground, that will create a hot air bubble called thermals. And a thermal will provide an elevator ride for these birds to get higher and higher altitudes, just like a glider plane. So when they get to the height that they want to get to, they will glide out without having to flap. Just to my right, past our parking lot and past the tree line, just a couple of miles down in that direction is Long Island Sound. Long Island Sound is a large body of water. They can't get ridge lift. They can't get thermals over a body of water. So that creates a roadblock, a barrier. Because of that, it was determined that birds of prey, when they get to this location, to our site, they are hitting a roadblock because they've reached the end of their ridgeline highway. They see a barrier in front of them because of the body of water, and they have to figure out where to go next. I like to say it's, in a sense, like they're reaching the end of a major highway, they're getting off an exit, traffic is building up at the toll booths, and they got to figure out another place to go. But that helps us in our favor because then it gives us an opportunity to have a determined location that these birds are gathering in mass so that we can get an accurate census of them. And another question we get is, how exactly do we keep accurate track of these birds? There are so many local birds of prey that live in our area. There are so many different individuals. A lot of times people ask, how do you know you're not counting the same bird twice? And it can get somewhat complicated, but the easy answer to that is because these migrating birds are at such high altitudes and moving in one direction, it's very easy to sense the behavior of a migrating raptor species. Here, when we are facing the northwest, we are looking in front of us and scanning the skies with our binoculars. And these birds are low down, perusing right over the grass, although some of them will. Because of that altitude that they want, we are looking for sometimes pepper specks of birds up in the sky heading in a southerly direction. They don't want to go due south because that would be right over Long Island Sound, which they don't want. So we see them often heading right over our heads, heading in a southwesterly direction. So it's seeing those silhouettes of a very determined looking bird coursing over the sky, heading towards the southwest to head away from that barrier, which is what we are looking for to count these birds. It's also knowing what species are moving through at a given time of year. Certain raptor species are passing through earlier in the season. As far as when, the hawkwatch migration season generally goes from September through November. Certain species such as broad-winged hawks and osprey are migrating all the way down to Central and South America. So they get to move on first, and that will generally peak around right in the middle of September, around September 15th through 20th. And then other species after that, such as the sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawks, bird-eating hawks, will be coming through in later part of September and October. Also in November, that's when larger species will show up. So actually, if I could just see the slide again really quick, please. Just for some people, you may wonder also, what is the best determined time to go out hawk watching? During that season, even though we're out here most days, there are certain weather conditions you want to look for, because sometimes, just like a river builds up with a lot of water in it and dries out, raptor migration is very much the same. Usually, a lot of birds will build up between periods where there is certain bad weather conditions and favorable weather conditions. If there's been a couple of days of rain, they don't want to fly in that. And if a cold front passes through, those birds will build up behind that passage of the front. And that often is going to be the time you want to get out to a hawk watch, when there is northerly winds, usually with a westerly component that will bottleneck them into our area, so that will create large, dense concentrations of these birds. The speed of the wind will often vary, but generally in our areas, we want somewhat moderate northerly winds to push them down our way. Clouds also help very much because it helps us to spot these birds as well. In all blue sky, they can often vanish into the stratosphere. And if you're down by the coast, even though that is a barrier, certain species of hawks have more of a tendency to get pushed right to the coastlines. So on certain days, especially if you have that passage of a front, you might be lucky to see thousands of hawks migrating through in a single day. And sometimes you'll get very lucky to see large groups of them at once. And I believe in the next slide, there is a video of something you can witness if you happen to be fortunate to be here on one of those days. Go to the next slide, please. So this actually was here at our hawk watch. One species, the broad-winged hawk, the red-tailed hawk's smaller cousin, will gather in large groups to migrate together and utilize thermals to get altitude. And so that is about 1,000 hawks you're seeing right there in one field of view that we were counting, because that species will congregate in those groups together to go on their journey all the way to Brazil, Ecuador, Venezuela, Chile, where after they leave us, then they will be counted at hawk watches along areas such as Corpus Christi, Texas, and down into Veracruz, Mexico, through Panama and into South America, where hawk watches are collecting the same data we are collecting. Now, very briefly, I know some of you are wondering, where in my area can I go to a hawk watch? So on the next slide, we happen to list some other locations that you can visit hawk watches that are staffed either every day or at various times throughout the season. Our location in Greenwich, Connecticut, we're right on the New York border, but if you're along the coast of Long Island Sound, the other hawk watch in Connecticut that is staffed most days of the week by volunteers is Lighthouse Point Park in New Haven, because that is a more coastal hawk watch. Species of hawks such as falcons often are seen there in larger numbers because they are often pushed right to the water's edge. In the more northern part of the state, on Litchfield, Connecticut, Chestnut Hill conducts a hawk watch. They're not staffed every day, not as frequently as the other two hawk watches in the state, but it is also a site where you can see large flights. And in New York, there are both hawk watches that are out in the fall and the spring when the raptors are returning, especially along the areas of the Great Lakes that create a barrier on their way north. In the springtime, in March, April, and May, you could visit Braddock Bay in Rochester. You will be hearing from Dana Ford shortly. Derby Hill in Oswego. I think I saw a couple of you here were joining us from there. And also on Lake Erie at Buffalo, there's the Hamburg Hawk Watch. In New York, there are areas such as, besides areas in our area, there is on the Hudson River, Hook Mountain is a wonderful site to view raptors because that is right along cliffs of the Hudson River, creating another southern facing barrier. In Orange County, there is Mount Peter in Warwick, New York. Along the coast on Long Island, much like Lighthouse Point, Fire Island is the equivalent of that. And in Oneonta, Franklin Mountain is a wonderful location in October and November to see large raptors, including golden eagles. And if you're coming to us from other areas, there are wonderful hawk watches in New Jersey. I just noticed someone posted about State Line Lookout along the Palisades, as well as Montclair. And of course, some of the more renowned hawk watches in the country, such as Cape May, New Jersey, and Hawk Mountain. However, we are fortunate because of so many different locations that are doing this tallying. There are many hawk watches close by that are able to pick up different lanes of the highway. And just 10 miles to our north, across the Westchester County border, in Mount Kisco, our friends at Bedford Audubon Society also conduct their own hawk watch right on a cliff over 684 at Butler Sanctuary called Chestnut Ridge. And we have Tate Johansson with us today from Bedford Audubon, who is not only going to tell you about their hawk watch, but also go into the specifics of how you can identify these different species in flight. Because it's very different than just looking at a bird perched. We're looking at an alphabet of shapes. So I'm going to pass it to Tate now, and he's going to tell you a bit more about how you can identify some of these birds that we're seeing.
Okay. So I am Tate Johansson. I'm the naturalist at the Bedford Audubon Society in Westchester and Putnam counties, New York. And I'm also the coordinator of Chestnut Ridge Hawk Watch, which Ryan generously mentioned just now in Mount Kisco. This is going to be a very quick, high-speed run-through of the identification of raptors in flight. There's a lot more to it than this, but here we go. So if you go to one of these hawk watches and you get a good day when raptors are actually migrating a lot, these birds will, almost all of them, be in flight. And partly depending on which hawk watch you're at, many of them, because of distance and bad lighting, will not have many or any plumage details visible at all. So most of what you're going to have to be using to identify these birds is shape and behavior, not field marks, which is very different from most birding. It takes experience to be able to do this reliably. So, don't be discouraged if you're starting out and you don't pick it up right away. You can't really pick it up right away. It's not all that straightforward. It's a gradual process. And it involves being wrong a whole bunch of times over and over and over again, and learning from your mistakes when the bird comes closer, hopefully. So one important clue besides shape, which I'll talk about a bit more, is behavior. And so here are a few terms for describing what a raptor is doing in flight. There's soaring, gliding, kiting, and hovering. And we'll go into those in a sec. And understanding the difference between those is important for identification, because raptors change their shape drastically depending on what they're doing in the air. And some species are more likely to do some of these things than others. That helps with ID. Or some of them never do some of them. Also, in the case of soaring, some of them have a very characteristic look that you can use to identify the species that disappears when they start gliding. So if we could have the first video. So this is a sharp-shinned hawk in flight. And what it's doing is flapping and gliding like the accipiters, which we'll talk about later, that group of birds do. So quick flaps, it's being buffeted by the wind a little bit in this video, but then gliding, where it's going forward without moving its wings in between the flaps, and generally gradually losing altitude. So the wings are generally slightly crooked when a bird's gliding. And if we could have the next, okay, this is kiting, example of kiting. This is a red-tailed hawk. Kiting is where a bird just rides the wind and stays in one place with very little movement of the wings. Like you can see, this bird is adjusting its primaries, its flight feathers, but it's just hanging there. And in Eastern North America, if you see a buteo, one of the broader winged soaring raptors doing that, it's going to be a red tail. Red tails do lots and lots of kiting. And the next video, this is the name of this is rough-legged hawk kiting. Is actually hovering, right, for almost all of it. No, that was not very long, but flapping its wings and for the most part staying in one place. Then it stops at the end and drops down. So that's hovering. And I think we have one more video. No? Yes, there we go. This is a soaring Cooper's hawk. You can see it's not moving its wings much at all. And it's circling. It's circling and circling. And what it's doing is trying to gain altitude from an air current underneath it. So if we can go to the accipiter slide. This run through of the different species you might see at a hawkwatch is very, for those people who have tuned in from California and Florida, this is going to be pretty applicable, but you'll get some different species there. This presentation has a strong northeast bias. Sorry about that. But so in our area, we've got 3 accipiters, and for the most part, it's just Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks. Like 99% of the accipiters you see at our hawkwatch around here are going to be Coops and sharp-shins. And so the accipiters as a group have relatively short, fairly rounded wings and long tails, which they tend to keep pretty folded. So the impression is one of fairly short, rounded wings and a long, thin tail. And they tend to do a lot of traveling by giving a short burst of flaps and then a glide, and another short burst of flaps, and then a glide, and so on, which we saw with that sharpshin in the first video. And we've got these three species: Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, northern goshawk, and they're all different sizes. Sharpshins are about the size of a blue jay, or a little larger. Goshawk is about the size of a crow, or a bit larger, and Cooper's hawk is in between. The best way to tell sharpshins from Cooper's hawks, and it's really hard, is if they're soaring, the leading edge of the wing, and a Cooper's hawk is basically straight, whereas with a sharpshin, they hold their wings slightly crooked. That does not apply when they're in a glide. They both crook their wings in a glide, like just about any raptor. Okay, next slide. We got our buteos and the broadwings, which we saw the flock of through the scope in the earlier video. They're the smallest of our buteos. They are kind of stubby, chunky in shape, like slightly shorter tailed, slightly shorter winged than the other buteos. Red tail is the larger one. They look kind of muscular in flight because they have sort of bulgy flight feathers on the trailing edge of the wing. Makes them look kind of muscle bound. They do a lot of kiting. Neither of these two other buteos do any kiting. Red-shouldered might hover once in a while, but I've never seen one kite. The red-shouldereds soar with their wings slightly forward. And again, that only applies when they're soaring. They don't do it at any other time. But their wings project slightly forward as if they're reaching out to give you a hug, we like to say. And just the broadwings travel in large flocks. And that's another way to identify them. If you see, 1,000 buteos, they're going to be just about all broadwings. If we could go to the next slide. We got our eagles. We got two eagles. They're both very large birds, long, broad wings, and fairly short tails, which they often fan. They do a lot of soaring. The bald eagle holds its wings quite flat when soaring. The goldens hold their wings very slightly upward, like in a very shallow V called a dihedral. And if you know turkey vultures, they have a more pronounced dihedral, and we'll talk about vultures in a second. But the goldens have a very slight dihedral, a little bit less, less than a turkey vulture's. But you can use that at a fair distance to tell them from a bald eagle. All right, next slide. So these falcons are the really fast ones. They do lots of flapping in flight. And sometimes they'll glide, especially kestrels and peregrines. And again, we have three sizes. Kestrels about the size of a blue jay. The peregrine's about the size of a crow, and then a merlin is in between, closer in size to a kestrel. But how they fly is very helpful for telling, especially kestrels and merlins apart. Kestrels, although they have a fairly direct flight, for a falcon, it's fairly fluttery. And like it doesn't really have to get anywhere all that quickly. And a merlins typically, although they'll slow down sometimes, but when they go by a hawkwatch, typically it's just in a flash, incredibly quickly and with lots of flapping. And it's often gone before you can point it out to anybody. So the falcons are really the only ones with very sharp pointed wings in our area like this. Go to the next slide. We got our vultures. So turkey vulture down lower is probably a very familiar bird to everyone. And And they're very distinctive in the air, even though they look a lot like or a similar shape to an eagle or a black vulture. They hold their wings up in that shallow V. And partly because of that, they are very unstable looking in flight. They're not actually unstable, but they look like they might flip over at any minute. They're rocking back and forth in any kind of wind. And you can see that at a great distance. That can instantly tell you it's a turkey vulture and not a black vulture or either of our eagles. The two vultures are they look very small-headed because they don't have feathers on their heads. They can look almost headless at a great distance. That's another way to tell both of our vultures from eagles, which they resemble superficially, like they're both large, dark birds with long, broad wings. But they have very small-looking heads. Black vultures and both our eagles are very stable in flight. They don't rock back and forth at all, basically, even in very high winds. Go on to the next slide. And then here are two raptors that don't really fit into any of the other groups. Our osprey, which is a really spectacular, beautiful bird, which nests along the Sound and along the Hudson, and now around our reservoirs in our area now. It's a very distinctive looking bird. It looks rather like a gull in shape. It's got long, thin wings. It's a large bird, like an eagle or a vulture. But it holds its wings crooked almost all the time. And those wings slightly droop like a shallow M, if you see it from the side. They do a lot of soaring. And then our harrier. Harrier is shaped, it's a kind of a quirky one compared to the others. It's shaped very much like a miniature, thinner turkey vulture, in that it holds its wings in a dihedral again, in a shallow V, and it tips back and forth a little bit in a crosswind, and it's got a long tail as well. So there's our cast of characters, at least around here. At least out west, it's just about all of these species minus broadwing for the most part, and plus some others. But you could use just about everything I've said here out west and other parts of the country in the Southwest. You just have a few more raptors to worry about. All right, well, there we are. And I guess I will hand it over to Dana.
Thank you so much, Tate and Ryan and everybody at Audubon. Here we go. So I just want to thank everybody for having us on, myself and our feathered guest here. Got some great tips on and some great visuals on identifying hawks and where to go to find them. I'd like to introduce you to our broad-winged hawk. This is one of our education birds at Braddock Bay Raptor Research. I'm trying to get you to see her kind of quote-unquote good side. This bird is with us as an education raptor because she had been unfortunately hit by a car probably during her first migration journey south, and she suffered some permanent injuries due to that collision with the vehicle. Give a little stretch there. So she's missing her left eye and she has a little wing damage, so she's not 100% fully flighted. Yeah, we're stretching it out. We sat here and watched all of Tate's presentation, so she's was enjoying the silhouettes there and recognizing some of her cousins out there. One of the first things that surprises people when they see a broad-winged hawk in person like this up close is their size. And excuse me, they're often very surprised at how small they look up close. because in the sky, when they're air, they look a lot bigger. But they're, you know, medium-sized raptor. And as Ryan pointed out on the hawk menu, they are a hunter of a variety of prey, lots of rodents, some insects, and reptiles and amphibians. So they're a bird that tends to nest a little deeper in the forest and often near a pond or a stream where they can add those things to the menu that they're hunting there. Broadwings are probably one of, especially in the east, you know, one of the birds that we hawkwatchers get most excited about seeing because they come through in such large numbers, and those big kettles like you saw in the video are just super impressive, and it's really something you don't believe until you actually see it yourself. We get excited for them to come and arrive at our site at Braddock Bay in the springtime. Around about mid-April is when they start showing up on southerly winds. So we kind of operate in the opposite conditions as many of the Northeast hawkwatches that do in the fall. But it's a great time to keep it in mind when you're itching to get out to a fall site and it's April, May. Come on up north, head to the Great Lakes, and you get to see a lot of your familiar faces at a spring site. So it's great fun. We're going to do a little preening. So our Broadwing has been with us for just about 4 years. She turned 4 this past summer. We only know that because she came in as an immature bird. And I'm going to show you really quick, hopefully, not really her baby picture, but maybe her teenage high school picture. This is what she looked like when we were, oops, come on, babe. When we first acquired her, she was an immature bird, different plumage, so we are able to know her age. I guess she didn't like me showing off that old picture too much there. But hopefully she'll be with us, you know, in captivity. They can live to be, you know, 10 plus years, and that's, you know, usually about their lifespan in the wild, but usually a little longer in captive life. She's become a very comfortable bird and an excellent educator and ambassador for her species. Amazing birds. I know we're coming up on a little bit short on time for us, but I encourage you to keep looking up in the sky, and we are doing some events online this weekend to actually celebrate a slightly different migration. Up at Braddock Bay, we see a natal dispersal of hawks. So it's kind of something that happens before fall migration. We're seeing lots and lots, hundreds of immature red-tailed hawks and some other species like broad-winged hawks, bald eagles, and turkey vultures that are just wandering around during natal dispersal time this year. So it's something that you can check out online at our Facebook page or website. And I know they'll be sharing some of that information later on at the end of the program. And I'll be around for Q&A, so look forward to hearing what you have to ask for us, if you do.
Thanks so much, Dana, and thanks to all of our presenters. If we can just get our final slide up, that will just have our email addresses and some information on there. Reminder to everyone that this is being recorded, and so you can see it immediately on Facebook as soon as we're done, and we will put it up on YouTube as well.
Hey, buddy.
So now's the point when you can put your questions into the chat box, or if you're watching from Facebook, you can comment. You can always email us ct@audubon.org or audubonny@audubon.org. Unfortunately, we've already gotten in a ton of great questions, or rather fortunately, but unfortunately we won't be able to get to all of them, so we're going to do our best. So all our panelists can come back on video now, and I will start pitching out some questions to you. Thanks to everyone again for joining. Okay, so our first question is from Charles, and it is, how can a mass of 1,000 hawks find enough food in one spot? And panelists, if you just want to raise your hand, I'll pass it to you. How can that many find enough food in one spot? Ryan?
Does the broadwing want to answer the question?
That would be nice if she could, I think. That is a question I think that is a little bit of a mystery, from my knowledge anyway. We know that these birds are traveling, basically, I know I'm more familiar with spring migration and how things work with that. And in the springtime, at least, these birds are really driven to move north for breeding season. Broadwings especially are very migration driven, and although they do rely very heavily on rest stops and resting during the night, fueling up the next day or prior to their roost the day before. So they're going to be very dependent on finding big tracts of land where they can find those resources. We always are wondering where the big roost sites are in our area, but they're generally, because they're a forest species, they're going to probably look for more denser cover at night. They're a smaller raptor that is prey for larger raptors and other animals. So it's one of those things they keep pretty well hidden though. But they're going to be pretty much, stop and eat and go. They're on their way, on their journeys, and especially in the fall too. They need to get out of the inclement weather and back to places where they can find resources. And that's, Central and South America for this species.
Thanks, Dana. Ryan, I think maybe you can help with this next question from Jennifer. What is the best time of day to see migration?
That's a very good question. And while it can be a little complicated, I can say that, one, as I mentioned earlier, look for a day with the best weather conditions. The weather conditions are going to be more crucial than the time of day. You want northwest winds for fall migration at a given hawkwatch site. As far as the time of day, what I will say is, because these birds are trying to get such high altitudes, that the middle of the day when the sun is highest is usually when the birds are hardest to see. They're probably somewhere way up there, but they might even be too high for us to see them. They can get to be sometimes a couple thousand feet in the air. So generally, the morning hours between maybe 10 noon and then later in the afternoon, maybe 3 to 5, is when the birds are starting to lose altitude a bit more. It also is very dependent on when hawks are coming into the area. And we can look to certain things online to see if there is going to be large quantities of hawks coming into our area. And one thing that I will mention, this website was listed on the slide of hawkwatch locations. If people want to see numbers of hawks at different hawkwatch sites from any of our locations here all the way down into Central America, the Hawk Migration Association in North America has the website hawkcount.org, which all of our information is submitted to. And now a lot of us are submitting it in real time via apps, so you can see it even while it's happening. And what we do to see if we're going to get a lot of hawks coming our way is we look at the numbers of sites north of us. Where we are, we look at sites in Massachusetts, New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, to see, oh, they had several thousand broad-winged hawks yesterday. They're on their way to us. And if the winds blow them in our direction, that is what is going to create a good flight. That's when, if you see a large number of hawks from one of the sites on Hawk Count, then look at the weather to see if the winds are going to blow them in this direction, because that can often create the best conditions for certain days. For instance, I know both for our site and for Braddock Bay, we have had record days here of over 30,000 broad-winged hawks in one day because of just that perfect storm of weather conditions. So watch the weather forecast and watch hawkcount.org for that information.
Thanks, Ryan. Tate, perhaps you could answer the next question from Susan. What is the difference between kiting and kettling?
Yeah, so kettling is when a large group of birds are soaring. So that swarm of broadwings you saw, they were kettling, excuse me, soaring to gain altitude. And once they get to the very top of that thermal, that air current underneath them, they're going to stream out. They're going to glide down, hopefully to the next thermal in roughly the direction, excuse me, they want to go in. And then kiting is just when a bird is riding the wind and not moving its wings at all, essentially, or not more than the flight feathers, just hanging there. And that's something that red-tails do a lot, and I gather ferruginous hawks do out west quite a bit. And that's a big help in identification, because our other two beautios we have around here anyway never do that, as far as I know. Never seen one do that.
Thanks, Tate. Dana, could you reintroduce your friend for people who joined a little late? And
Sure.
can you tell us what does this bird eat?
Sure. This is our broad-winged hawk, one of the most common migrants in the East. They are generally, in the wild, they're going to eat a lot of rodents, but also some frogs and snakes and some insects. And in captivity for her diet is mostly mice. So she usually eats about 2 or 3 mice a day.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, question for you again. You showed a menu, you called it, at the beginning of the webinar. Is that available to the public? Lots of people are very interested in the menu.
That I unfortunately will have to do some research on. That graphic is a National Audubon Society graphic created by Roger Torrey Peterson. What I can do is I can look into making that available for anyone who is interested.
Great.
I would just also like to add to what Dana said with the broad-winged hawk and what it eats, and the fact that it's such a long-distance traveler. There are hawkwatches doing what we do, as I mentioned. Once these birds pass through our area, they're going to have to get through Mexico next, where the ones from the Northeast meet up with all their friends from the Midwest, and they will travel through areas such as Veracruz, Mexico, where they will sometimes count hundreds of thousands of them in one day. And it helps to create some wonderful cooperation between our different countries' organizations to help protect birds. This is a hawkwatcher from Veracruz at our center several years ago, pointing to where their hawkwatch is compared to ours. And in Panama, where they pass through next, Rosabel Mira, who is a friend of ours, the director of Panama Audubon, they help to teach children about the raptor migration down there where they're passing through. So it helps to create this wonderful sense of cooperation and inclusion and equality with all of our countries that are helping to give a better life to these birds in general.
Thanks, Ryan. Your favorite question is up next. It's from Luke, and it is, how do you know that you haven't counted the same bird twice?
Thank you, Luke. As I mentioned before in the program, when we are looking for migrating birds here, we are often looking for certain kinds of behavior from them. Behavior, and also knowing what species are local in our area. Dana mentioned their natal dispersal of young red-tailed hawks up by Lake Ontario, which is very different than what we have down here. Most of our red-tailed hawks don't migrate in our area. We really have to see one that isn't soaring around and then heading in an opposite direction from where we want it to go. We mentioned the thermals that they use in migration to get altitude. So what we look for, and each hawkwatch is different because they're positioned differently. We want to look for birds that are at high altitudes of species that we know are migrating at that given time of year, heading in a southerly direction over our heads. We know, especially if we see a group of 1,000 broad-winged hawks that's heading over, just like a big line of synchronized planes heading over our head at 1,000 feet in the air, we know that they're on a mission to get from here down through the Appalachians to Texas, through Veracruz to Panama and into Brazil for the winter. So they're not going to turn around and come back unless it's late in the day and they need to drop down somewhere for the night. Check into a hotel, get up the next day, get a snack for the road, and then keep going again, using those thermals as gas stations. So it's the direction the birds are going in, the height that they are, and knowing which birds are local and which birds aren't. If we see a bird going north, we know they're probably just hanging around. So there's several factors that help us to determine the most accurate ways of counting these birds to ensure we're not double counting them. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Ryan. The next question is from Jeff. Is eBird the best way to report hawk migration sightings?
Well, I guess I'll chime in on that one. I think eBird's an excellent way to report sightings, especially if you're not like an official counter at a site. And you know, and it may be one of those cases where in the future, if we get a lot of reports from a certain area that had not been known as a hawkwatch site, you know, that's one of the things that eBird compiling all that data, you know, can clue us into other spots that they might be growing. But the other thing Ryan mentioned, hawk count, is where you can follow along all the different hawkwatch sites, and really that data is inputted by the sites themselves. But I think for anybody who's out there birding and watching hawks, it's a great way to keep track and help other people find out where these hawks are going and have been.
Thanks, Dana. Tate, a question for you from Kurt. What is the most common raptor you see?
It's the broadwing, although I mean it depends on what time of year you're at the watch. The broadwing migration is extremely concentrated into about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks in mid to late September, and that's by far our most numerous species at Chestnut Ridge. That's not true of every hawkwatch, but inland hawkwatches it generally is. But basically, you know, you just get single birds after about early October, and in November you almost certainly won't see any. Some others we get a lot of are turkey vultures, migrating turkey vultures, in October, and a lot of sharpshins in October as well. Those are the 3 most common, the 3 biggest numbers.
Yeah, Tate, maybe I can follow up with that question from Steve. Can you give us a general order of migration by species going south?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in September, it's the broadwings, and then, let's see, kestrels peak, I'd say late September, early October. A lot of things peak around then. Excuse me. Osprey is also late September, early October. Sharpshins peak early October. Then mid-October, it's Cooper's hawks. Lots of turkey vultures going through then till late October. Bald eagles and harriers are sort of all over the place. They're migrating all through the season. And I'm trying to think what I'm leaving out. Red shoulders peak in, it seems like early November these days. Late October, early November. Red tails, early November. What other kinds of birds are there? Let's see. Black vultures, I don't know. I can't even tell whether they're migrating ever.
Thanks, Tate. Here's a question from Bonnie. How can we protect the food sources for the hawks, especially in suburban areas?
Number 1, don't use rodenticide. One of the leading causes of raptor injuries and deaths has really been proven to be to not use any sort of poisons that we use in our households for controlling rodents. As science has shown, these birds are our best rodent control we could ever ask for. So the best thing we can do for them is to keep their food source healthy so that they can control it naturally. Because if it gets into their system, it can do great damage. And we've seen just how easy it is, even though these are strong, resilient birds, to ensure that their food sources are protected and available for them by not poisoning them. We've seen, obviously, in the case of bald eagles, peregrine falcons, and osprey, we saw the effects that DDT had on them in the earlier part of the 1900s. And it was largely hawkwatches and research that people were doing out in the field like we were doing that showed that these birds were in such steep decline. And they had to figure out that we needed to ban these very toxic chemicals that were damaging these birds and making them nearly disappear forever. So as a result of that, we can see through hawkwatch numbers, the declines and then how we can establish helping these birds to help their populations recover. The first year that Quaker Ridge had a full-time season counter, I believe the bald eagle total for that season was 5. 2 years ago, we had a record year of 310 bald eagles. So we can see how it can help environmental success stories and help us to understand how we can further help birds that are in trouble. So please don't use rodenticides, and we encourage natural ways of helping their food populations to stay healthy so that they can do the important job of being our rodent control for us.
Thanks, Ryan. This question is from Thomas, but multiple people as well. On a good day, how far can a hawk travel? We should have each of you, like Jeopardy, write down the answer and then reveal it.
Well, I know that I can give kind of anecdotal observation. So often, we have I'd say sister site in the spring, Derby Hill, which is to our east and up on the eastern end of Lake Ontario. We tend to see a good amount of the same birds, depending on the winds, the day before they will, or a day or two before. And again, it depends on the weather and how that's affecting how fast they're moving and whether they need to hunker down in bad weather or not. So just again, a kind of a timeline sort of observation there, from Rochester to, Oswego, or, where Derby Hill is. I mean, how many miles it is, but, it takes you probably about 3 hours or so, but the hawks, they'll be there the next day. So you guys can add to that probably a little more scientifically than I can.
Well, Dana, we actually only have 2 minutes left. So at this point, I just want to give each of you the opportunity for anything last minute that you'd like to add before we sign off, and to remind folks how they can be involved where they live or how they can find a Hawkwatch site near them. So why don't we just go in order of our presentations, Ryan, Tate, and then Dana, and then we'll be done. And thank you to everyone again for joining us. This has been recorded and we will share it with you.
Thank you, Sharon, Liz, and everyone. Thank you, Tate, Dana, and Dan as well from IT. As Sharon was alluding to, hawk watching isn't just a scientific activity for scientists. It's something anyone can be involved in. That's why we call it community science. And what better opportunity to enjoy birds and to actively be a part of something that's helping them too. I first started coming to this Hawkwatch when I was about 12 years old. And thanks to hawkwatchers who are out here every day, who helped me with that experience of learning how to identify these birds, which is the best training you can get. Now we're in a position where we can train other people to do the same thing and enjoy it. So our Hawkwatches, when they are operational, are open most days a week, weather permitting. Of course, this year is going to be very different with the current pandemic situation. At our Hawkwatch, at least, masks will be required and we'll be social distancing our chairs. But it's a great way for us to gather outside and hopefully safely to be able to enjoy this in nature together. And Hawkwatches are such a great place not only to enjoy this, but to enjoy people who enjoy doing the same thing, to enjoy beautiful views too. So many different Hawkwatches have incredible scenic views. Our Hawkwatch is significant that we are a completely accessible Hawkwatch where even wheelchairs and mobility devices can come out here. So anyone, regardless of abilities, can come enjoy Hawkwatching here at our site. And at Chestnut Ridge, it's a beautiful overlook over 684 where you can see Long Island Sound. There are Hawkwatches where you can, like Braddock Bay, you can go up the platform to see Lake Ontario from there. It is a wonderful thing to get to witness and to be a part of something that is really helping our ecosystem. I will also just quickly say that I know we're running short on time, but I am going to be giving a webinar if you would like to look even further into identifying hawks and hawk watching this Saturday at 1 p.m. We're doing a webinar here for the Greenwich Audubon Center called Remarkable Raptors and Their Highways in the Sky. So you can learn some more ID tips and more about hawk watching. If you would like to register for that, I believe you'll be sent that in the follow-up promotional materials, and we'll probably post it in the chat as well for you to have it. So thank you everyone so much. I will pass it to Tate.
Thanks. Yeah, I would like to thank everyone involved in this. And I just wanted to say Chestnut Ridge Hawkwatch starts August 25th, goes until November 25th. And it's not quite as accessible as Quaker Ridge. There's a short hike up a hill, 5 to 10 minute hike. And then we have the Hawkwatch platform, bleachers as if for a sports event, which it kind of is. It's like one. And someone's up there 9 to 5 through September and October, at least. It's a slightly shorter day than that in November. But there will be someone up there, weather permitting, counting hawks, and maybe a lot of people. So you're more than welcome to come visit. Masks required also. Dana?
My turn. Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what both of you said. Thank you again for allowing me to be part of this and our feathered friend here, our Broadwing Talk. We are a spring site, so when you're getting itchy and you can't wait till the next fall season to come by, come on up and see us in the spring. But we also, the natal dispersal flights are still going on till the end of August and maybe even early September. So we'll be continuing our count through the end of the month, and you can follow along on our website and at dunkadoo.org. We're actually trying to do a lot of real-time data entry, so it's a lot of fun. And if you want to learn more about what that natal dispersal is about, we have online programs Friday night and also throughout the day Saturday, and then we also having some in-person stuff. So if you're in the Rochester area, come on out and visit Braddock Bay. And I'd like to end with saying, you know, hawk watching is a great way, and in fact, birding in general is a great way to get out and just learn about all parts of nature. Because once you start looking at birds, you automatically find other things to pay attention to, and it's just a great way to get connected to our environment and start paying more attention to what's going on out there. So get out and enjoy while you can.
Thanks everyone, and thanks to everyone for joining. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.